Okay. Hello, everyone. This is the October 2025 webinar of the Essex County branch of Ontario Ancestors. My name is Linda Urquhart. I'll be your host for tonight. Cindy Robichaud will be monitoring the questions. Thanks for joining us. Just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded and will be added to the Essex County branch YouTube channel. Also at this meeting, everyone is muted and your camera is turned off during the presentations. Questions will be answered following the presentation. Just post your questions in the chat box as we go along. Now, recently, Zoom has made some updates to the chat feature. So when you hover your mouse over the chat icon at the bottom of the screen, and click on it, you should get a chat box, like that white box that you're seeing on the screen now. Right now it says everyone or new chat. And what we'd ask you to do is if you go to new chat and click on it, it'll show you the different names of the people that are registered here. So registered for the webinar. So pick Cindy Robichaud's name. And that way, when you do have a question, you can always send it to Cindy and she'll get it right away. Makes things a lot easier to handle. Now, if you don't have a chat box, you may need to enable it. I guess there's a small blue box with a little paper and pencil that you click on and it should open the chat buttons. So I hope nobody has any problems. If so, let us know. Now, there are many ways you can connect with us. Our webpage gives you access to many of the digitized collections of the Essex County branch, as well as the Franco-Ontarian Research Center. So email us with any questions you have at this email address and join our Facebook group where you can connect with other family historians from the Essex County area. A lot of questions pop up in this Facebook group, and they are usually answered very quickly by highly experienced family historians. If you're able to visit us to view our library holdings, the Essex County branch has two locations. The Windsor Public Library Local History Branch houses the Essex County Branch Library Collection, which contains genealogical information collected for over 40 years. Check their website for hours of operation. The Franco-Ontarian Research Center houses the Franco-Ontarian Genealogical Library Collection, which has also been collected for over 40 years. That center is located in the old Maryvale Convent building at 940 Prince Road, but you'll find directions for parking, etc., on the Essex Branch website under the Franco-Ontarian Research Center tab. They are open every Tuesday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., as well as the same hours on the second Saturday of each month. And to assist you to find where you can find things in our collection, I would advise you to go to the main Essex County branch website, and at the top you'll see those buttons. One of them is resources. I would just hover your mouse over resources, and what you'll see is a long list of resources that you can click into. At the very bottom of that list is the Essex Branch Library Catalog. And if you click on that, then you can see at the bottom there below this, on this screen, you'll see that you can then do a search on one of these search boxes, either just a general search, or if you happen to know the author of if you're looking for a certain author, you can search by author or by title. And on this example, I typed Colchester in the general search box. And then what I got was a list of everything in all of our library collections containing that word. And I've just picked 3 here just to show you, because this is how you can find out where the actual item is located. because that second column is location. The WPL obviously means it's at the Windsor Public Library, the local history branch on Sandwich. FRC refers to the Franco-Ontarian Research Center, and that's where you would go. You would know that you would have to go there to find that item. But in many cases, you can find it at either place, because as you can see, Edward Milo Johnson's The Mystery of New Canaan, it can be found in both locations, both the Windsor Public Library as well as the French Center. Sometimes you'll find that the location just says the word storage. That also means that you can find it at the Franco-Ontarian Research Center, but just ask somebody there to help you find it in the storage area. And just to go to some webinars coming up, the next Ontario Ancestors 2025 webinar series will be on Thursday, November the 6th at 7 p.m. Catherine Lake Hogan will be presenting Invaded, the Fenian Raids and the Canadian Response. You can register for this on the Ontario Ancestors website under the Education tab. The Essex and Kent branches are co-hosting their next webinar on Friday, November the 14th at 7 p.m. The speaker is Jill Nicholson. Join us to learn about the history of the Essex-Kent Mennonite Historical Society or Association, a brief history of the Mennonites in Essex-Kent, and a review of the resources in the archives and the artifacts in the museum available to assist genealogists and historians. Tonight's presentation will be given by Deborah Honor, who will be discussing the lives that touched Bellevue in Amherstburg. And just a few words about Deborah. She is a former elementary school teacher. After retirement, she studied to be a professional genealogist, which led her to become a family historian, a researcher, a lecturer, and an author. In the past 14 years, Deborah has done extensive research into the people who owned and worked at Bellevue. She is a member of Ontario Ancestors, the United Empire Loyalist Association of Canada, and the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. I will now hand the meeting over to Deborah. So go ahead.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, can you see my slide?
I can't, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There,
Okay.
okay. I can see it now. Fine.
Yay. Okay, now can I get rid of everybody on the side?
You can just make it smaller.
Make it smaller.
Like that at the top of where the names are.
Oh, I did it. Yay. Oh. Well, welcome everybody to my talk. And I hope you'll enjoy hearing about the history of Bellevue and Amherstburg. And thank you, Linda, for the introduction. This is the cover page of the book that I've produced. And there are the pictures of the different people that have owned it or who have lived here. Let's see here. There we go. So for this talk, these are the topics I'm going to basically discuss for tonight. So who is Robert Reynolds? The Bois Blanc or Boblo Lighthouse. If the Bois Blanc means white woods, which is what was on the island before the fort decided to take them all down so they could see what was on the island. Paintings by Margaret and Catherine Reynolds. The connections between William Johnston and Dallas Norvell. Perry Lytton and the native burials. The Mullen family. The Jones family. The Veterans Home. One veteran and his story, and his name was Joseph Love. I can't tell you the story of all 38 of them that I know. And the Ukrainian Catholic Church murals and the cross on the Detroit River. So to get started, before the house was built, we need to discuss a little bit about the actual connections with the Reynolds family. So Robert Reynolds's picture is in the middle of this slide, but off to the left are the first two people I would like to talk about. James McGill and his wife Charlotte. James McGill was one of the owners of the Northwest Fur Trading Company in Montreal. It was the competition to the Hudson's Bay Company. They got a lot of their furs from the Ohio River Valley, and Amherstburg was actually one of the main trading posts that they used with the Northwest Fur Trading Company. So there's a very big connection between the two cities. James McGill did not have any children of his own, but he married Charlotte. Guillemin is her maiden name, Desrivières, and she was the wife of one of his partners. And as his partner died, about 5 years after he died, James McGill married Charlotte, and Charlotte had had 2 sons with her first husband, and James was very good with children. Both of them loved children, and so he raised both of those children as his own. The oldest son became a partner with him in the business, and the younger son, he bought him his lieutenant in the army. His second son was Thomas Hippolyte Desrivières, and he married Thérèse Bouchette. Now that's an old picture of Thérèse, but Thérèse was the daughter of the Commodore Bouchette, who was in charge of the Provincial Marine Navy in Lake Ontario. So there's all these connections with the French. That was one of the things with James McGill, is that having a marriage to a French family gave him connections to a lot of the rich families in Quebec. It was a good marriage, not just loving marriage, okay? Therese's first husband died in the West Indies in a foolish duel, but the two of them had produced one son. And as you usually do, you name your son after the richest person you know. So their son became James McGill Trottier de Desrivières, which is the full name. So after her first husband died, she had like 7 sisters, and half of the sisters married down here in the Detroit area, and half of them were married up in Montreal. One of her sisters' names was Rose, and Rose married Robert Reynolds' brother, Ebenezer. And a month later, Robert Reynolds married Thérèse. So that's the connection. Robert Reynolds is now the sort of the James McGill is the stepfather-in-law to Robert Reynolds. Now, of the Reynolds family, there are 3 names above that I don't have pictures for them. Margaret Reynolds and Thomas Augustus Reynolds were the first 2 children born to their parents. It was Jean Goodfellow and Thomas Reynolds. They were both born in Scotland. Ebenezer, Robert, and Catherine were all born in Detroit. And Robert Reynolds' father was the Deputy Assistant Commissary General at Fort Detroit. So that's how it all fits. Margaret and Catherine were the only 2 sisters, and they never married. And there's 19 years between them. Okay, now the drawing of Bellevue in 1813 was before it was built, and they can tell that by the watermark that's in the back of the paper. So this is basically the plan of the house, and the original is still owned by the family that is connected to the Reynolds family, and they are planning on donating it to either the Windsor Museum or the Windsor Art Gallery. The second picture is a picture that Catherine Reynolds made in 1819 after the house was finished. And the original painting, she sent 6 pictures to her brother, Thomas Augustus, because he was in the Royal Navy and he lived in England. Well, they didn't have pictures, they didn't have photographs, so she sent the paintings. That picture is now in the DIA, which is the Detroit Institute of Arts. So in 1813, James McGill had died and had left the Reynolds family money and land in his will. Now, if you look carefully at that painting, if you can, over to the left, no, to the right of the house, there's some white sails in there, and that shows you a ship going up the Detroit River. So that's the back of the house. It's not the front of the house. So Robert Reynolds was born in 1780, and he died in 1865. And he took care of all of his family members. Teresa, his 2 sisters, Margaret and Catherine, and his brother Ebenezer, all of them died at Bellevue before Robert Reynolds. It was like he was the one that had to take care of everybody. After being a merchant with his brother, Ebenezer, Robert joined the commissariat, where his father was the Deputy Assistant Commissary General. Sounds like a real neat title, right? But to join the commissary, you had to be a clerk first, and then you became a Deputy Assistant Commissary General. So it's not a real high level position, but it was a good job. When his father died in 1811, Robert took over his position and remained with the commissariat until 1820. So we're not going to talk too much about that part of his life. After he retired in 1820, this is what his life was like after the commissariat. So first, between 1816 and 1819, Robert Reynolds built his home on Lot 4th, Concession 1, Malden Township, and he named it Bellevue. Well, his wife was French, so she's the one who named it. Number 2, he was a farmer, respected by his peers as a horticulturalist and a floriculturalist. Number 3, he was a justice of the peace for the Western District. There were about 50 justices of the peace in the Western District, and he was one of the ones that was very well respected. Number 4, he was a school superintendent for 2 years that I have been able to find so far. And number 5, he was a commissioner for Upper Canada with the task of building a lighthouse near Amherstburg. And that's the story that we are going to talk about tonight. So here's a postcard of the lighthouse, and the house to the right is where the lighthouse keeper lived. So in April of 1835, the Upper Canada government wanted lighthouses to be built along the Great Lakes. Robert Reynolds and Charles Fortier were assigned as commissioners for the lighthouse near Amherstburg. Bar Point was first mentioned as the location, but Reynolds and Fortier consulted several of the most experienced shipmasters on both the British and American sides, who said the best placement would be the south end of the island Bois Blanc. Bar Point was low and sandy, while Bois Blanc had a higher elevation of 15 feet. And it had a solid and permanent foundation at a much less expense. April 1836, Reynolds had 4 tenders, with all of them being over the budget the government wanted. Doesn't that sound familiar? To spend, but they agreed to grant the contract to John Cook at £1,175, and that was one of the middle prices. The lighthouse was completed by November 1836. Let's think about that. That's from April 1836 to November 1836, and it's done. That's fast. As per the request of the mariners, the lantern was lit on the 7th of November, 1836, until the 15th of December, when navigation was closed. Mr. James Hackett, who volunteered at first, became the lighthouse keeper. So that is his house to the right. Local tradition asserts Andrew Kemp, attached to the Royal Engineers, was the architect of the lighthouse. Yet, Reynolds and Fortier handed in the receipts, And on voucher number 5, that was paid directly to Robert Reynolds, it stated, for executing plans, elevation, and section for a lighthouse to be erected on the south end of the island of Bois Blanc, at the mouth of the Detroit River, Western District, and plan an elevation of cottage for the keeper, and drawing up the specification of the buildings, etc. The cost was £3 10s. Therefore, Robert Reynolds is the one who designed the lighthouse and the keeper's house, because he got the £3 10s. Now, this is a picture of Bois Blanc, the lighthouse on there. It is on Parks Canada land. It is not on the land of the person who owns most of Boblo Island. As you notice, the door at the bottom has been bricked in because vandals were getting in and they were lighting fires at the top of the lighthouse, so it had to be protected. Next section is Margaret and Catherine Reynolds. Margaret was born in 1765 in Scotland as the oldest child of Thomas and Jean Reynolds. Catherine was born in 1784 in Detroit as the youngest child, a 19-year difference. They never married, but both became proficient artists. Their art education probably came from military officers who were trained to draw. Their father also bought art books from prominent artists for the two women to copy their styles. After their mother died, they moved in with Robert Reynolds at Bellevue, where both of them died. Now, if you look at the two pictures, the one on the left is done by Margaret Reynolds in 1813 of Amherstburg. The one on the right is 1850s, and it was done by Margaret Reynolds, or Catherine Reynolds, sorry. And if you look at their styles, both of their styles are so familiar, like they're so similar. And that's one of the problems, because a lot of the pictures that the two of them drew do not have their names on it. Is that possible pictures? Okay. So those two pictures were done. Oh, have I got the right one? Yeah, though. Yep. Aha, I see what I'm doing. Sorry, I got lost in my lines. Okay. These 4 pictures were done possibly during the War of 1812. These 4 pictures were painted on only 2 pieces of paper. The artist used only 2 colors. The topics of the pictures were from the Niagara Falls area and one from Montreal. Now, since the family was stationed at Burlington during the war, after the retreat from the Thames, it appears that these pictures were painted at that time. The reason being, paper was probably in short supply, as well as paint colors. The Montreal picture suggests the ladies traveled there to be with family during the conflict. This is all supposition, but these pictures are now located at the Library and Archives of Canada. So we're not sure if Catherine painted them or if Margaret painted them, but it would be interesting to compare these pictures with modern day pictures of those falls and see what kind of changes have happened over the erosion. Now, this is comparing 2 of Catherine's paintings. The one on the left is a picture of Bennington House in England. Now, she never traveled to England, but she would have copied the picture from a pattern book that her father provided. So this is how she's being trained. It was by copying the pattern books. The picture on the right is her rendition of Bellevue from the east, showing the back of the house. So on the right of the house, we can see the ship, like I told you with the other one, on the other slide. The style of the 2 paintings are very similar in that there are people walking in the middle of the page. The house is in the background, and the trees frame the picture on both sides, and even the style of the trees are very similar. Okay, next story. What is the difference between a druggist and a pharmacist? A druggist concocts his own medicine. He makes it. A pharmacist dispenses the medicine made by other companies. And at this time period in the 1800s, basically everybody was a druggist. There weren't pharmacists, and they would be making all these concoctions. So the next person who bought the house, well, after Robert Reynolds died in 1865, his son, Robert Todd Reynolds, who was a doctor, had moved to Kitchener, and was selling the house. So he sold it to William Johnston, who was a druggist. William Johnston owned the house from 1871 until 1887. And Dallas Norvell, William Johnston was trained as a druggist in Essex County. He later moved to Detroit, where he opened his own drugstores. There are at least two, and later a factory for the production of drugs. So that would be the beginning of starting with a factory. He bought a drugstore in Amherstburg, in which he also ran a grocery store. The manager of the grocery store was Dallas Norvell. The store was named the People's Drugstore. In December of 1883, after Johnston's wife died suddenly, he sold the grocery store section. Dallas became his bookkeeper. In 1887, William Johnston sold Bellevue and lived full-time on Gros Seal with his second wife. He would cross the Detroit River in a little boat to handle his business in Amherstburg. Now, the people in the picture that you're seeing, William Johnston is sort of lying on the ground. His mother-in-law is to the right. His wife is in the middle, and two of his children are to his are on the left of the pic, or on the right of the picture. Sorry, I'm getting my rights and lefts mixed up. Okay, so Dallas and William were good friends. Dallas, and tragedy struck both families in March of 1888. Dallas died on the 5th of March from epilepsy, and William died by drowning in the Detroit River on the 13th of March. Both men's obituaries were on the same page in the Amherstburg Echo. A week before their deaths, Dallas had warned William not to cross the river when there was ice running. But William did not listen. The little boat was hit by ice, capsized, and before he could be saved, William Johnston sank into the river. His body was found on the 2nd of May, 1888 in Oak Harbor, Ohio. His son, William Johnston Jr., identified the body and recovered all of his possessions, even all of the money that was in his pocket. So that's the connection between William Johnston and Dallas Norvell. I should add a little bit more on Dallas Norvell, because he was a writer for the Detroit Free Press, and his pen name there was Texas. His farm is where the road, Texas Road, is in Amherstburg now. And that's how the road got its name, was from Dallas Norvell's pen name for his articles in the Detroit Free Press. Perry Barclay Lighton owned the property after he bought it from he didn't really buy it. Somebody else bought it for him. I don't think that the Johnstons liked the Lightons. And 4 days later, this other fellow sold the property to Perry Lighton. So he owned the property from, his family, actually, I should say, owned the property from 1887 until 1925. Perry Lighton was born in 1838 to Henry Lighton and Elizabeth Wright in Essex County. In 1869, he married Mary Jane Toffelmeyer, the daughter of Jacob Toffelmeyer and Elizabeth Stockwell. The front road was moved from the river. While grading the front bank of the river, he discovered an Aboriginal burial ground and collected many artifacts. He made part of his house into his museum. Here's a picture of a postcard that shows Bellevue, and the front bank has been done by Lighton, and he's also put in white stones to print out the name Bellevue in front of the house. It was the town that moved the road away from the river. Mr. Leighton unearthed the remains of a warrior with all his accoutrements. These consisted of a pipe tomahawk, scalping knives, peace pipe, flints, and steel for making fire, war paints, brass kettles, a large trade silver cross, which was 11.5 by 8.5 inches, silver bracelets, earrings, buckles, wampum, and beads, also stones for grinding corn, and a copper coin of 1736, which helps to date that burial, comprising in all 1,800 different pieces and making one of the most complete collections of the kind in Canada. He was somebody who was very interested in history, and if you can see the pictures of the inside of Bellevue, his office, and all the ways he displayed all of the things that he had found or that he had bought from other antique dealers. It wasn't just the stuff that he had found on the property. Perry Leighton died in 1905, though, but his family remained at Bellevue until 1925. Many of the artifacts that he had were purchased by George F. MacDonald, who donated his collection to start the Windsor Museum. So a lot of the things you see in that picture are probably in the Windsor Museum at present. Isabel Norval and John G. Mullen were the next people to own the house from 1925 to 1946. Isabella Mullen was 70 years old, and John Mullen was 76 when they bought Bellevue. It took 3 years to remodel the home to the popular colonial style. Mrs. Mullen's father was Dallas Norval, William Johnson's bookkeeper. She would have been very well acquainted with the property, and she's probably the one that talked him into buying it. Mr. Mullen died in 1930, and Mrs. Mullen lived until 1944. They had 2 sons and a daughter, and the 2 sons also helped with remodeling the home. And they remodeled it back to the popular colonial style, which was very similar to the style that the Reynolds family had built the house. So this is the view of this is a picture of Bellevue during the time of the Mullen family. Now the Mullen family renovated a little bit of the house. Up above those bay windows there was no connection between the ends of the house and the middle of the house. And so the Mullen family actually connected those 2 sections with just adding that little part at the top. And that's where servants would live. Now, talking about servants, here's some of the people that were servants for the family, the Jones family. The Jones family were from Wrexham, Wales. Ethel, the oldest daughter of Robert and Alice Jones, had married Alfred Davies, and they emigrated to Windsor in 1927. They were able to convince Jack Jones to join them the next year in 1928. Jack was hired by the Mullen family to coordinate the building of the sunken gardens in the backyard. In June 1929, just before Black Friday in October, Philip Macomb Mullen, the son, paid for the passage of Jack's brother, Arthur, to come to Amherstburg. Arthur became the chauffeur for the Mullen family. The rest of the Jones family, 7 in all, arrived in Montreal, Quebec on the 18th of May, 1930. They were sponsored by the British Dominion Emigration Society. The house in this picture is behind Bellevue and would have been the home of the Jones family. In the 1931 census, Jack Jones, his father Robert, and brother Harold were all gardeners for a private family, most likely the Mullens. Along with Alice, the mother, and sister Pamela, they were living behind the Mullen house. 3 other children were working elsewhere in Amherstburg. The Mullen family had 2 other servants living in their home. Agnes Murphy was the cook from England, and Marie Nemeth from Nova Scotia. But her parents in the 1931 census were listed as Ukrainian. On the 29th of September, 1932, Jack Jones married the maid, Mary Nemeth. The next part of the history was after Mrs. Mullen passed away. So with World War II winding down in 1944, the government needed beds for the returning wounded World War II soldiers who needed medical attention. They needed to find accommodations for old World War I veterans who needed a home more than active medical attention. They needed a retirement home. It took 2 years for the Department of Veterans Affairs to be convinced by the local Canadian Legions and Town Council to purchase Bellevue as a retirement home for World War I veterans. Then another year for the refitting of the building to be suitable. The men had to be fit enough to handle the stairs and in fairly good health. The first group of men to arrive from Westminster Hospital, London, arrived on the 21st of July, 1947. And this is a picture of 10 of them. Only 9 days later, the first veteran died at Bellevue, and his name was Frederick Coleman. He's the one that's not in the picture. As the vets aged and needed more medical care, they were returned to Westminster Hospital in London. When they died, they were often buried in London cemeteries or brought home to their local areas for burial. I've been able to find where most of the names we've found for the veterans, we've been able to find where they're buried. Now, I've got one story for you about a veteran. His name is Joseph Walter Love, born in 1890, and he died in 1970. And this is very typical of the first people that were joining during World War I, who were older, is that they were English immigrants. Joseph was born in Cheddar, England in 1890. His residence in 1916 was Ridgetown, Ontario, and he was a farmer. He joined the 186th Battalion on the 3rd of March, 1916 at Chatham at the age of 26. On the 9th of June, 1917, Joseph arrived in England and was transferred to the 122nd Battalion, a forestry unit, because he was too short for the infantry. So if you go to the War Museum today, there is on the wall a chart, just like you would see for kids. And you had to be a certain height to be in the infantry. And he wasn't high enough, so he had to join the forestry unit. His discharge papers showed that he served in the Canadian Forestry Corps in France and Belgium. He was discharged on the 11th of July, 1919 in London, Ontario, and he received the War Service Badge Class A. That's what's in the middle picture. When the Bellevue Veterans Home closed in 1954, Joseph Love would have been one of the vets transferred back to Westminster Hospital, where on the 17th of July, 1970, he died at the age of 80. He was buried with a military tombstone at Woodland Cemetery in London, and that is his tombstone. The War Service Medal. This badge was issued to members of the Canadian Expeditionary Force who had been in service at the front and been honorably discharged or were still on military duty in Canada. The badge indicated that the wearer was a veteran. Not every soldier got one. Now, this is kind of interesting because I found this information after I wrote the book. But this is, and I wish the War Museum had a little bit more on this, but it's okay. The Forestry Corps, there's 3 members that were at Bellevue that were World War I veterans that were part of the Forestry Corps. It was created during the First World War when it was discovered that huge quantities of wood were needed for use on the Western Front. Duckboards, those are the things that they would have walked on in the trenches. The shoring the timbers so that the sides don't fall in on them. Crates, anything that needed wood had to be provided. The British government concluded that there was nobody more experienced or qualified in the British Empire to harvest timber than the Canadians. Now there's stereotyping for you. It was decided to use the Canadians over in Europe, cutting down forests in the UK and France. They needed the ships from Canada to bring over the soldiers, and they needed the ships to bring over the ammunition. They didn't want those ships coming over with wood. Several regiments originally slated for the front lines became military lumberjack units instead. Canadian troops with the coniferous tree cap badges, which is on the top right, identifying them as the Canadian Forestry Corps, cut trees in forests in England, Scotland, and France, where the timber was squared, sawed, and transported. Altogether, some 35,000 Canadians served in the Forestry Corps, which eventually was composed of dozens of companies, each composed of several hundred workers. They also had members from Portugal, and they used POWs, German POWs also in the Forestry Corps. I love their badge because it's got the trees on it, and then it's got axes. When we were at one of the museums in Ottawa, the young girl that was working there, she says, "Oh, those are tomahawks," because it was in the Aboriginal section of the museum. I said, "Those are not tomahawks. Those are axes for cutting the trees down." I wish they'd put those into an area that wasn't just Aboriginal, but at least I told her what it was. The next part of the story of Bellevue is after 1954. The St. Nicholas Ukrainian Church had it from 1962 to 2003. So during the 1930s, a group of history-minded men worked diligently to preserve the historical buildings in Amherstburg. Their names were David Botsford, George F. MacDonald, John Marsh, and others were instrumental in having a federal government designation placed on Fort Malden National Historic Site in 1939. David Botsford became the first curator of the museum. As historians and genealogists, David Botsford and George F. MacDonald at the same time were researching the Reynolds family and the history of Bellevue. One of the ways of preserving the building was to have it declared an historic site as well. So in 1944, after Mrs. Mullen died and the family wanted to sell the property, there was already a fear that it might be destroyed by a developer. The men were successful in having the building designated on the 25th of May, 1959, under the Historic Sites and Monuments Act. During that time, when the Department of Veterans Affairs was trying to sell the property, there were three choices proposed. Number one, the Government of Canada to keep the property as part of the historic buildings in Amherstburg with Fort Malden. Number two, the Brown Shipping Lines of Ohio, who at that time owned Boblo Island, wanted to tear down the building and use the property as a parking lot and a dock for the Amherstburg ferries to access the park. And number three was to sell to the Ukrainian Catholic Church diocese for a church. The Government of Canada was not interested in adding it as a museum, as the Bellevue was too far away from Fort Malden. The Brown Shipping Lines was not a good choice, as the building was just declared as an historic site. The Ukrainian Church proposal was the most appropriate option at the time because of the designation. The church would have a place to practice their heritage, and the legacy of the building would be preserved. The St. Nicholas Chapel opened on the 3rd of June, 1962. Now, these are some of the murals that are in the chapel area in Bellevue. The murals were designed for the chapel by Mr. Eugene Taskey, who lived in Michigan. He started by making the scenes with charcoal. His plan was to paint the murals, but when crossing the border with the paint, the customs officer refused him entry because he did not have a visa to work in Canada. The murals were never finished. In 1989, St. Nicholas Ukrainian Catholic Church commemorated the 1000th anniversary of Christianity in Ukraine by Vladimir the Great, Prince of Kiev, by installing a cross on the riverbank. By 2003, with a declining congregation, the diocese decided to sell the property and have the congregation join the church in Windsor. Since then, the property was bought and owned by a numbered company, and in 2016, the town of Amherstburg purchased it. They are now trying to sell it, and hopefully the building will be protected and used. So these are a few of the stories I have found about Bellevue. I hope you enjoyed this walk through the history of Bellevue. My book is available for sale at the Marsh Historical Collection, the Park House Museum in Amherstburg, the Park Homestead, the Ontario Ancestors located on Prince Road in Windsor, the Maidstone Museum on Puce Road, and there's a few copies at the Kent Branch in Chatham. So thank you for coming to my talk, and are there any questions?
Hi, Deborah, it's Cindy. Do you want to mention how long it took you to do the research for this book?
It took me 14 years, and the story about the Jones family I wouldn't have been able to do until I got the 1931 census, because that just came out a couple of years ago, and that gave me the story of when that family came over. I started when we started a group called the Friends of Bellevue, when we wanted to protect the house from the numbered company. And so I said to them, you know, I could do the research on the families. And they went, oh, yeah, we don't need that. Well, then the town of Amherstburg bought it. And somebody at the big meeting we had, they said, somebody should write a book. I said, I'm already researching it. I'll write the book. It just took a little bit longer than what people expected, I think.
Good. So you mentioned one question was the Reynolds family left Scotland. So do you know why that a family originally left Scotland?
I think he left because of his job. I think he was given the job at Fort Detroit. And so that's why he left. He was already a deputy commissary officer.
Okay. Lois wants to know what is the addition on the left end of the picture of your cover on the book?
Just a minute.
The buildings, I suppose. What is the addition on
Okay.
the left end?
On the left end, where the cars are?
I think by the cars, yeah.
Okay, that's an original part of the building, and that would have probably have been an office. So the original building had the main building in the middle, and then where those bay windows are, those were just verandas. And then they had the two extra buildings on the ends. So the one on the left, we think, was more of an office for the farm. The one on the right was the kitchen. And you would keep the kitchen separate from the rest of the house. So if the kitchen burnt down, the rest of your house stayed.
It's a good plan.
Yeah, but you know what? You've got the kitchen out in a different building than the rest of the house. It's going to get the food's going to get cold walking through that veranda in the wintertime.
Sure. Yep. Sure.
I'm sure they enclosed it real fast.
Someone is more of a comment than just mentioning they appreciate that knowing the original name of Texas Road now, where it came from.
Yeah, I think that's a cute story too.
Yeah. And then I know I had said this to you before we started. Someone else mentioned that they had never heard of the Forestry Corps, but learned a new piece of Canadian history. Thank you.
You can go online with the War Museum, and they've got videos, and they show the King and Queen actually visiting one of the Forestry Corps. It's very interesting. There's more on their website about it than there is. The War Museum had one great big huge painting of people cutting down trees. That tells you nothing.
Yeah. All right, that was all the comments and questions here. I don't know, Linda, was anybody send anything to you?
No, I don't have anything from anybody, but is the house empty now, or is anybody living there, or what's the situation with the current
the town? The
status?
town owns it. There's nobody living in it, and it's been 10 years. 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 10 years A lot of vandalism inside the house, I'm sorry to say. That's the sad part. But supposedly, I've heard just recently that the town's going to make some kind of an announcement soon. Hopefully, it's going to be really good news. I'm not keeping my I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but my hopes are low at the moment.
Hmm.
Lois says, thank you, Deborah, for this interesting story. I am from Kingston and have not visited your area yet.
Well, you've got another Bellevue house, and a lot of people were saying it was the same, was our house, because we said our house is a Palladian style. It was originally a Palladian style. And a fellow from Quebec said there are no Palladian houses in town, in Canada. And then he says, but you're talking about the one in Kingston. No, I'm not talking about the one in Kingston. I'm talking about the one in Amherstburg. So he finally found it. Oh, there's a Palladian style house in Canada. It is the only designated Palladian house in Canada. And the other designated building is the Province House, which is a government building in Halifax. And a reason for that being the only ones is because that became the federalism style in the United States. And by the time Robert Reynolds built this house, people didn't want their houses to look like American houses. So that's why it's probably one and the only one.
Another question more about the servants. So you mentioned the servants for the Mullen family. Were you able to find any records for the families earlier? Reynolds families.
Robert Reynolds family, yes, I have got stories about some of theirs, mainly by finding them in the census records. So you can see in 1851 and 61 who were the people living at their house. Like you don't see who's working on the farm, because the people who are working on the farm were probably people that lived in the area. They had their own homes, so you don't know them. But yes, and it turns out Robert Reynolds was usually hiring people who were retired soldiers. So it's interesting seeing their history as well, than just the Reynolds family. The Mullins family, I don't know. I don't think I have any for the Johnstons or the Lightons.
So Deborah, I assume that the home could never be recreated as an actual home where people lived with the type of furniture they would have lived in, the type of dishes they would be using, the kind of thing you usually see when you go into an older home in a town. Like, it's just a shame because I assume because it became more than just home for a family, it became, a retirement home, or it became part of a church association. It's a shame that I just wonder if anybody has ever found or collected any of the furniture or other things like that from the families, like the Reynolds family, especially.
I've talked to Mr. Carlisle, and he's a direct descendant of the Reynolds family, and they have some of the silverware, like the candelabra, the huge candelabra. It was huge. It was amazing, the pictures he sent me that his mother still had. I don't know what they're doing with all the stuff because she's just passed away in the last couple of months. She was 98 years old. The house could be made into a house again. It would have, I will tell you that there has to be an awful lot of work done on the house and a lot of remodeling. But the actual house frame was built by the carpenters who built the ships in the Navy Yard. That house is solid. Those doors were still closing as if they'd been built just the year before. They were not scraping on the floor. They were not getting stuck, and like that. The house is solid. What can be done on the inside could be anything. When you designate a house, you're basically designating the outside of the house, not the inside. So if somebody wanted to build a spa or something like that inside, they could.
Interesting. Well, if there are no more questions, I do want to thank Deborah for her presentation and for all the hard work that you have done and completed for the Essex County community. We're really thankful that we have someone like you in our area. It was an outstanding webinar and has given us all a better appreciation for the history contained in these historic buildings and the need to conserve them in order to conserve our own history. So I hope that in the future, it
We'll
will,
all be able to go inside.
right.
I do have one other thing to add about my book. If you
Okay.
buy the book, the way I wrote the stories, every chapter is a different story. It is not like a novel where you have to read it all in order. It is in chronological order. But if you wanted to just read about the Mullen family and all of their flower gardens, you could do that without reading the stuff on the Reynolds family. It's a kind of book that you can just sort of pick and choose what story you want to read, but every chapter is a different story.
I would
So
think I would want to read though every story. Okay, so if there's anybody else that wanted to ask anything at the last minute, or Cindy, do you have any last words? Otherwise, I'll have to close the meeting off.
No, I just want to know what Deborah's next books will be.
give me a chance to think about that one, okay?
Okay, again, thank you, Deborah, and thank you all that came and watched us. Again, it'll be recorded and it'll be up onto the YouTube, the Essex Branch YouTube site, probably in a week or so. So you can watch it all again. Thanks, Deborah. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Okay, good night, everybody. Have
Thank
a
you.
great week and see you next time.